Well, welcome to this session in between tea and lunch. This session is called Hidden Hunger in Context. We've been talking about various topics over the last day and a half, so some of you might be thinking, why hidden hunger? What is hidden hunger? By now, perhaps we should have identified hunger, examined it, gotten to know it really well. But jokes apart, this session is really about the context of hunger. So we're going to be talking a little bit also about social power and why social power comes in the way of hunger and nutrition, or food security and nutrition, and also perhaps how social power can be leveraged to actually address the very same challenges. So the context of the session is that we are going to be talking a little bit about social power, so not just power which resides with companies and corporates and governments, but within communities and within sort of people within those communities. So with that, I would like to sort of request our first speaker, Neena Shah, who's going to be on a call. We have her slides. I think we'll be flipping through her slides, and she will be on a call. They've been doing a lot of work in Mumbai with communities and how to sort of empower women in the whole challenge towards food security and nutrition. So over to Neena, who's going to be talking about her work and some of the learnings from there.
Yes, thank you. So good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be interacting you, if not in person, at least through the internet. And thanks to OICSD and Tata Chemicals and my organization for all the effort and the opportunity. I work with an NGO called SNEHA, and we work in Mumbai and the regional Mumbai metropolitan area, basically on health and nutrition of women and children. So the story of how SNEHA started is that Dr. Armida Fernandez, who's our founder trustee and a neonatologist and a former dean of a tertiary municipal hospital, she was taking rounds in the hospital in the evening, and she came across this woman who was with her two young children and had one arm in a sling. And she asked the lady, "Why are you here at this time and not going home?" And the woman replied that my mother-in-law broke my arm, and if I go back home, she has threatened to kill me. And hearing this and being inspired by the need to move beyond the walls of the hospital to the doorstep to where the issues really arise is what led Dr. Fernandez to set up SNEHA with a group of her doctors and a philanthropist. So today we are working in about 7 municipal corporations covering around 15 million urban population. And from August, we've just got news, we will be covering entire urban Maharashtra. Anyway, today I'm going to share some insights which I have gained from the work on child health and nutrition, where we covered about 400,000 population, and we helped 5,300 children recover from malnutrition. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. So all of you are familiar that urbanization is a growing reality, and currently around 50% of the world's population lives in urban areas. In Mumbai, 44% of our population lives in informal settlements. You can see from the slide the heavy contrast between the recent Worli Sea Face link and the informal settlements, which we call slums. They're characterized by poor quality housing, insecure tenure, poor access to water sanitation, hazardous locations. Okay, so one of the issues that we grapple with on a daily basis in our work in the slums is the migration. So around 24% of the families on an annual basis shift residence because they live on rental licenses. And this means families are uprooted, pregnant women, young children who are undergoing treatment are moving to a new unfamiliar environment where they don't know where the urban public health services are.
Alfie, do you want to come up and talk a little bit about Neena's work? Thank you so much for stepping in.
So Neena can talk with a vast deal more knowledge and passion than what I can talk about today, but I found it really fascinating, my conversations with Neena over these last few days. So there's a few points she was going to make as far as I know, and each one was, for me, it was a revelation. So one of the first points she made is that a lot of the children and the families in the slums in Mumbai where she works will spend up to 30 rupees a day on sweets. And these are incredibly poor families. And my question was, well, that's just crazy of them. Are these stupid people that they're spending so much of their hard-earned cash, which they simply don't have enough of it, on sweets? And she explained there was a number of reasons for why they spend so much. So partly there was an issue that every street corner had a sweet shop. Every street corner there was someone with very cheap processed sweets ready to be sold. The next point was that these have been portrayed to them as very healthy products. So some of them have got fortification in them, which is there's a debate in that. But there's also a wider issue that many of these were marketed to them on what she called a micromanaging basis as healthy packaged food. So it's healthy because it was packaged. It was sterile because it was packaged. And the last point was simply aspiration. So this was the reason why they were spending money on sweets. The second point was that she said that the quality of data we've got is incredibly low. And she said, for example, many of the times they didn't look at how high children were. And so I obviously come from this country, and to me, measuring height is a remarkably simple thing to do. You put a child against the wall, and you measure how high they are. And she pointed out they're working in the slums, and there isn't a steady enough floor, or an even enough floor, or an even enough wall to collect that data. So to me, this was a really fascinating point. Someone like me can sit in my lovely Oxford office, and I can write a policy proposal, and we'll go out and we'll measure how high children are. But the reality is, even that's remarkably hard. So they've got solutions which is looking at, I think this picture is meant to be lying on their side. They've got solutions where they've taken in special kit just so they can measure how high children are. So just the point that many of the assumptions we make about what we can measure, what data we can collect, is not necessarily correct. Now, I'm not quite sure what she was going to talk about on this slide, but I think one of the points she also raised was the problem of the pencil. And I spend a lot of my time collecting data outdoors, and pencils are amazing for collecting ecological data because they don't run. What she described as working with various government institutions, they would collect all the data in pencil, and then the data would be rubbed out, and better data, from the government's perspective, would be written in later. So here we've got a really interesting story of power in terms of other people had the power to change the data, but also, again, people like me use that data. We rely on that data. So there's two issues there. A, the data, there's a falsification, and then when we do our research, we don't trust the data. Maybe we shouldn't trust the data so much that we then use in our meta-analyses. Then there was an issue of men. So she said in terms of, they mainly work with women, and often they'll talk to women about things like how they breastfeeding, the advantage of breastfeeding. They'll talk to women about family planning, and they might well persuade the women. And then they don't see any result. And the reason for that was that the women then go back, and they go back to the men, and the men don't allow them to take that action, or the mother-in-laws. And I always find it amazing how mother-in-laws seem to be entirely in opposition to daughter-in-laws. And so she then said they're deliberately going out and trying to talk to men, trying to talk to mother-in-laws. But that itself is quite difficult because often the men are working crazy hours of the day. So they find it hard just at a practical level of going to find the men to talk to the men. And the men don't necessarily like talking to them as women or don't necessarily listen to them as women. And they tend to be a largely women-based organization. So they made an issue. So sanitation. We've talked a lot about sanitation and the problem of lack of toilets. She said there isn't a lack of toilets there as much. It's just that they don't want to go to them. So there was two reasons. Toilets were generally dangerous areas for women. So there were men hanging around them, and they were perceived to be dangerous, so you could only go at certain times of day. And then the other point was they were charged. There was a fee to go to these toilets. And so children specifically would never go to the toilets because no one wanted to pay for a child to go to the toilet. And the other... and then here's a poem. I'm not going to read out the poem, but I'm going to let you all read the poem. I think it'll be better that way. If you can try and put it in Neena's voice. There's your time for reading the poem over. The very final point she made, and she didn't want to make this point because she said she didn't have enough data for it, but it was one of the points I found most interesting, was this issue of domestic violence. So we've talked today a lot about, and the last 2 days, about these different issues that come in. She said there's a big problem with domestic violence and malnutrition, and I just couldn't understand how that could be the case. And she said she doesn't have hard data for it yet, but she thinks the reason is that domestic violence essentially reduces the power, reduces the autonomy of the woman, and the woman in the household tends to be the one who is feeding feeding the children, and feeding the whole household. And reduction of the autonomy of the woman reduces the ability of her to go out and buy appropriate foods and to run the household in the way she would like. And she hasn't got data, but what an amazingly depressing question to do more work on. Is there a relationship between domestic violence and nutrition? So I apologize you haven't got Neena today. It was an example of the power of the visa people overriding our power to bring people together. But do try and get in touch with her in the future, and her contacts are in the pack, and she does amazing work as well as the rest of Sneha.
So we have Richa Arora, who's from Tata Chemicals. I think she's going to be talking about
No slides.
the journey that Tata Chemicals has had over the last 30 plus years in looking at micronutrient fortification, so iodized salt, etc., and where they are in that journey today.
I have a confession to make. I've spent most years of my working life in the big, bad world of business, big and small. And some of the conversations which I was a part of around the various tables yesterday, the one thing which seemed to be emerging as a consensus there was that there are only two kinds of businesses, the bad and the very bad. The submission I'd like to make is that yes, as far as the Tata Group is concerned and Tata Chemicals is concerned, sustainability and social aspects of growth are kind of embedded in our DNA. But increasingly, corporates are eager to look at sustainable growth because they're seeing that in the long run, profitability is going to come from sustainable growth. So they may have a selfish reason for sustainable growth, but in the long run, that is the way to go. Okay?
Thank you.
Sorry?
We can just say thank you.
It's a bit, okay. So I thought what I'll do is I'll kind of treat this 6 minutes as a series of soapboxes, and we'll see how much time kind of goes into each of the soapboxes. And the first area I wanted to kind of share was the iodization program, which was run by Tata Chemicals and the Government of India, which was really the launch of Tata Salt, and how the country went into the addressing the micronutrient deficiency of that time, which was really iodine. Today it's a little different, and we are talking about IDA and iron deficiency anemia. And I think it bears to mind as to, what were the solutions which were found at that point in time, and there may be some lessons there as we move forward and get into the sessions in the afternoon. The first I'd say is there was translation of research into policy making, and what do I mean by that? In the 1950s, way back in the 1950s, there was an experiment done in the Kangra Valley to see the impact of iodization on the population there, which was suffering from goiter. And from that time on, there was a strong formulation, there was a strong program formulated on the back of that research. So that's the first learning there. Translation of research into policy making. I think the second aspect was the consistent legislation to support that policy. So in 1983, when Tata Salt was launched, it wasn't mandatory to have iodized salt. Tata Chemicals was approached by the Government of India to take part in this program. 2 years from then, the legislation to actually ban any sale of non-iodized salt came into force. And that's really one of the key reasons for the success of the iodization program. The third aspect was the whole area of awareness building on the initiatives, and that was initiatives both by the government and the private sector. So Tata Salt, created awareness about the incidence of goiter, how iodization could help. It created a branded market for salt, and then on the back of that, a lot of other players entered the market. So there was a market and consumer awareness of iodized salt and the importance of salt which is created. Now, if you kind of rewind and kind of fast forward rather to now, we are trying to undertake a similar initiative in the area of iron fortified salt. So we have what we call the double fortified salt, which is iodine and iron fortified salt. And I think there we also have a technical challenge in terms of kind of scaling it up and taking to the masses. It's a very small percentage of what we are currently selling in the market. And I think that's where I'd go back again to the iodization program And it was actually 5 different stakeholders working together to get that in terms of an intervention for the population in general. So one was, of course, the government itself. There was a lot of work which was done by government bodies like ICMR. There was, of course, the corporates, and Tata Chemicals played the lead role there. A lot of influencers and doctors and NGOs who were also part of the ecosystem. And that's really the learning from there. It was a successful private-public partnership in the true sense of the word. And I think some of the lessons from there, if we are able to kind of move forward through the discussions which we've been having in terms of creating those networks. So it's not that different people are not doing work in their specific areas and their specializations. It's about bringing them all together and kind of working towards the ultimate impact. So that's the first soapbox, and he's already telling me I'm over in terms of time. The second area I wanted to talk about was, how does the need for micronutrients actually link back to agriculture? And that's one of the realizations I've had in the 2 years I've been with Tata Chemicals, is that why should you need fortified food in the first place? The food which we eat, actually someone had shared the typical Indian thali yesterday, which has the pulses and the chapatis and a portion of vegetables, and that actually has all the nutrition and vitamins and minerals you need. Why is it that we still need fortification? And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is there's been overall decline in the diversity of the food basket and the consumption. So millets consumption has come down. If you look at just the variety of vegetables from what we had some years ago, from about 300 to about 20-25 varieties. So there's a diversity of the food basket itself has come down. The second aspect is that in this less diversified food basket, the quality of nutrients in each food type is coming down. So when you look at, for example, an apple has about 9,000 different phytochemicals, I'm told. But the number has reduced over time by about 500 to 600. So both the quality, the diversity, and the quality of what we're consuming is coming down. Now, when we look at the reasons for this, there are again a couple of reasons. One of them is selective breeding of crops, which has led to proliferation of new varieties of crops that are high yielding, but not necessarily nutritious. And I think it's important to share her data on wheat, which was a part of the agricultural revolution, where because of the focus on high yielding varieties, it was at the expense of nutrition in some ways, because if you look at data from the 1950s to today and you look at the percentage of magnesium and iron and zinc in that, it's down to almost half. So the exceptional focus on yield and high yielding varieties has been a bit to the detriment of the nutrient value of these products. I think the other thing which one kind of sees now standing at this point in time is that the green revolution bypassed the pulse production, and that's another area of business which we are in. And this is also because the remuneration for wheat and rice and grains like that was of a higher order of magnitude, and pulses were kind of just went into a downward spiral where it became less and less remunerative for people to actually grow pulses. And therefore the yield decreased over a period of time. So there's even less of an incentive for the farmer to grow pulses. And today we have a situation where we have a deficit of at least 15 to 20% of our requirement, and that's created a crisis in the country, literally. It's a crisis which the government is only now starting to kind of look at in a serious way. So fortification is becoming essential for all these reasons, but the answers really lie in a big way in agriculture, I believe. And some of the work which I've been kind of privy to see over the last day or so and hear about it gives me the I would say a lot of hope in terms of being able to have those interventions happening in the work which we are doing with farmers. And we are working with farmers in about 30, 40 districts is a plan to be able to actually grow more pulses. And that's a program we started about 5 years ago. It's called MOPU, Grow More Pulses program. So I'm out of time, but the last area which I wanted to touch upon is that the differences in food consumption habits has an impact on how fortification works. So yes, there is a lot of talk about oil fortification and dairy fortification, but the way Indians consume oil and dairy products is different from how it is in the Western world. And yes, companies, for example, we tend to boil the life out of milk, we use a lot of fried food, and that tends to kill a certain percentage of vitamin A, D, or E, in terms of fortification. And yes, companies are trying to calibrate what goes in so that the ultimate impact is there. But these practices have to be acknowledged, because all the solutions of the developed world may or may not necessarily apply in the Indian context. I want to just quickly now, I'm ending by saying that when we talk about nutrient by nutrient science, we need to also keep in mind the fact that when we're selling a product which is out there, which consumers are paying for, which is not just about the midday meals and addressing malnutrition, we have to have the nutrient in the context of the food in the context of the diet, and the diet in the context of the lifestyle. And that's probably an area where we've not spent too much time discussing. Where does food fit into lifestyle? Because all of us as people who eat food, ultimately it's also got to do with how things taste and how our perceptions are about what we want to eat. So when when you tell a consumer that this is iron fortified wheat flour, what is the reaction? It may or may not be positive, because there is certain expectation of natural fortification. There's a perception that it may impact taste because it's got something added. And I think those are factors also we need to look at as we go into fortified products which are there for the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richa. I think what we're maybe what I was thinking, Alfie, was if we can actually have, because I think Dr. Shankar is going to talk about things which are somewhat related in terms of micronutrients, micronutrient deficiencies, and fortification, etc. So I'm going to request Dr. Shankar, who's had a very long and illustrious career in these topics, to go first.
Micronutrient deficiency is a hidden hunger. It's largely a hidden public health problem. It's hidden even from those who suffer from it, they don't know. Numerically, it is the single most important nutritional disorder. WHO estimates that more than 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies. What are micronutrients? They're just simple vitamins and minerals. There's several of them. Most of them cannot be made in our body, so they have to be part of the diet that we take. Some of them in a different color, like iodine, iron, vitamin A, zinc, vitamin D. These are the ones that require our urgent attention, because they're the ones most often found to be deficient in people's diet. Secondly, their deficiency states lead to grave consequences, and more importantly, there are very effective, cost-effective, simple strategies that can be used, and they are compatible with primary health care approach to virtually eliminate these ones. What is the extent of the problem? Say in India, it continues to be a silent emergency. Most of us have heard about the very high prevalence of anemia. More than 80% of children below 2 years are anemic. And most of it is nutritional anemia, and WHO estimates half of the anemia is probably because of iron deficiency. You can see 70% of school-age children, 60% of pregnant women, and about 55% of women in reproductive age group are anemic. Most of the other deficiency states are also very high. Like the child you see here with blindness due to vitamin A, this kind of clinical deficiency states are not seen anymore. But you still have huge problem of subclinical deficiency of many of these vitamins. Now, how can we solve it? At a national level, ideal would be to diversify the diet. If people can eat right, if we can get everything from the food, that would be the best situation. But it's very, very difficult to achieve. Not that we should keep an attempt to get as much as we can from the food. For example, in India, the National Nutrition Monitoring Bureau, which records what people eat over a period of time, shows with respect to vitamin A intake, 75% of pregnant women get less than 50% of their daily requirement. 75% of children get less than 50% of their daily requirement from diet. So it's a huge deficit. It's the same case with other micronutrients. Now, the other strategy is you can supplement, provide the medicinal doses to the high-risk groups. Like we provide iron folate supplements to pregnant women, adolescent girls, and young children. The other strategy is fortification, where you add the missing vitamins and minerals to your commonly eaten food. And this is a strategy which is not a new one. In 1912, iodization of salt started nearly simultaneously in both Switzerland and United States. Today, more than 131 countries have legislation that mandates addition of iodine to salt. There are more than 80 countries that mandates or have a legal provision that enables addition of B vitamins and iron to flour, wheat flour, maize flour, etc. So it's not a new strategy, nor is it a new strategy in India. In 1953, India started mandatorily adding vitamin A to hydrogenated vegetable oil. In 1962, we started salt iodization, which by 1990 became a national law. It's important to realize that these strategies are not exclusive of one another. In most situations, we need more than one. It's only a combination of strategies that would work. Now, when I say fortification, I would just like to say that we focus on mass fortification. What WHO classifies them into different categories. Mass fortification is one where you add vitamins and minerals to your commonly eaten staple food. Often we confuse it with a market-driven fortification of products, which does not really address the problem or doesn't reach the people who need it most. And the opposition to that comes often from that. But what we talk about is mass fortification of salt, fats, wheat flour, rice, milk, etc. Now, what can we do in the Indian scenario? Yes, sir. So these are the staple food. I have put the numbers of what is the potential reach. If all that is fortifiable, you can't fortify all the oil that people consume because the industry structure required to fortify is different. All that is fortifiable with respect to edible oil, wheat flour, milk, double fortified salt, etc., both through commercial channel and PDS, offers a big opportunity to reduce this vitamin mineral deficiency in a vast majority of the population. You can reach up to 1/3, a half of the population in some situations, so it's time to act. As this shows, even with this strategy, you can't reach all. The question to ask is, will this reach the most vulnerable? Probably not. Or those who are reaching it, do they need it? The answer is an emphatic yes, because probably it will reach a lot of population in urban, peri-urban areas, and like Neena's presentation couldn't go through, most of them are poor. Now, can we succeed? If we can succeed with salt, which is one of the most fragmented industries, more than 10,000 farmers producing it. Yeah, in the years, the most recent survey as of last year shows that 92% of the households use salt with some iodine. Nearly 80% of them have salt with adequate iodine. I've been told, but I would just like to end this to say we've got to position food fortification as a complementary strategy. It has its own place. It has got to be positioned right. It is not to be projected as a panacea. Thank you.
I'm going to now invite Dr. Barbara Smith next. I understand Dr. Barbara is doing a lot of work in India on farming practices. Dr. Barbara represents the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really great to be here. So we've been talking a lot about nutrition, and I'm interested in this. The focus of this conference was sustainable nutrition, and I'm going to focus on the sustainable side of that, those two words. So I only have one slide, and this slide is for me to introduce you to Ovajit, who's a beekeeper. And he was 12 when I took this photograph, and he lives in Tripura, which is a small northeastern state in India, an area where there's quite a lot of conventionally farmed land, but he himself works for his father, and his father's an early adopter, and he's looking at new farming practices, and he'd like to show that he could do it better. So Ovajit was put in charge of beekeeping. The family had a problem on their land. They had to hand-pollinate some of their crops because they didn't have sufficient pollinators. And this keeping of bees has helped them, it's solved their problem. The bees that he's keeping are Apis cerana. It's a small native honeybee, one of 4 Apis species, and related to our Apis mellifera, but it's a native species. And now he's 16, and he's been experimenting with his beekeeping, and he's found that he needs 4 beehives on his hectare to enable sufficient pollination on his farm. Crucially, having kept bees for quite a long time, he feels that pollination gives him more than just good yield. He feels that it gives him better quality fruit, that more seeds are in his fruit so he can save seed and sow his own fruit from his own seed, and that he can provide for his own future needs that way. And importantly for our discussion, he feels it provides healthier crops. He wants to know if he's right and how he can improve even further. And all his questions are really about health and healthy food production, although he may not be aware of hidden hunger, and his version of health certainly includes well-being. So the question is, can an ecological approach help him with his questions? And what more can we, as ecologists, contribute to help him with his hopes for plentiful, nutritious food? So we'll come back to Ovajit later. In a wider sense, it would be useful to know if using that ecological approach to answer these kinds of questions can make significant inroads into solving the larger problem of 2 billion people suffering from hidden hunger, or whether the impact is so marginal that it is of little urgency. And the truth is that this kind of research has fallen outside the traditional avenues of research into nutrition, or biodiversity for that matter, and we have very little evidence. Traditionally, as we all know, research is driven top-down, and we move towards simplification of systems via monocultures generally, and societal demands drive us to look for a magic bullet. They're asking us to look for cure rather than prevention. That's what we tend to focus on. However, in the case of ecological solutions, I think that cure, based on restoring complex networks, is a big ask, and it might be an impossible task, actually. And the work that's been done on uncrop biodiversity, looking at field margins and how we enrich farmland, has largely been divorced from the nutritional quality of crops, and it's usually tied into simpler economic concepts of yield. So I think the big question for ecologists working on nutrition is can ecological diversification make significant contribution to sustainable nutrition or not? And there's much discussion about the importance of eating a diverse diet to attain sufficient and complete nutrition. And I'm going to assume that this is known in this room. We're not going to discuss that because the barriers to communities having access to diverse diets are actually not ecological. They are largely political and market-driven. And so I'd like to give you a few examples of how we're beginning to pick apart some of the more complex hidden relationships. And I'm going to use examples from pollination ecology. And I'd just like to pause here and to point out that it's amazing what you can find out when you have the funding to find it out. And bees are a hot topic. And that is the reason that these examples are coming from pollination ecology. But I'm sure there are a lot more examples that we could have if we only had the funding to do that research. So we know that pollination is implicated in the production of a significant fraction of nutrients in the human diet, i.e. that pollinated plants are nutrient-rich and that we eat a lot of them. And if we want to put a figure on that, it's about $153 billion worldwide value of pollination. That's the figure that's being bandied about. Pollination is important in several economically important crops across the world. And one of the crops that is very important for, I'm sure you all know, is almonds. And in North America, they shift great trucks of pollinators and bees across America to pollinate the almonds. And almonds are sold because one of the popular things about almonds is they've got good health benefits. It's supposed to be very good for the heart. And it's a ratio of high oleic acid to linoleic acid ratio, so you want high oleic acid, which has cardioprotective benefits. And there was a group of researchers who did an experiment comparing bee-pollinated plants with wind-pollinated and self-pollinated almonds. So there's a certain amount of self-pollination in that species. And they found that you get a better ratio of these fatty acids if you have pollinated plants. So bee pollination, or any kind of pollination, but we do bee pollination, increases the healthy ratio in the nuts. So you get better, healthier nuts if you have pollination. But it was not an entirely straightforward story, because at the same time as you get that better ratio of fatty acids, vitamin E was lower. And we think that's because if they're not pollinated, the nut develops slower and the vitamin E has a chance to develop in the nut. So these mechanisms aren't very well understood. It's really important for us to understand more about them. They've also done some work on strawberry, which gives us another twist, and this is quite interesting because then they're looking at different varieties. So there's also varietal differences and varietal effects. And the workers who were looking at strawberries showed that flower scent varied between the varieties, that bees responded to the differences in the scent, suggesting that visitation would be affected. And then they looked at the pollination and found that the pollinated plants had all sorts of qualities that were useful, like they were sweeter, they had better shelf life, and that's important for nutrition, you know, the fact that the fruit will last longer. In fact, what they said was sorry, they've got a note here saying longer shelf life, reduced fruit loss by at least 11%. Okay, so I've got 1 minute. And so I just want to say briefly that the work at the Centre, we've been doing some work at the Centre for Pollination Studies at Calcutta University, and that's been showing that increasing the intensity of farming practice has a detrimental effect on the number of pollinating species, and that pollinating services fall as farming intensifies. So clearly this has consequences for nutrition. If we want to I'd just like to return to Ovijit and his problems. So Ovijit, his questions may be answerable using ecology, but his problems aren't all his own. And this is important because, okay, he can pollinate some of his crops with Apis cerana, but he also has problems with his brinjal. And brinjal is pollinated by wild species, carpenter bees, blue-banded bees, and these are also declining. So it's not just his problem, it's his neighbour's problem, because these kind of solutions are at the landscape scale. So this underlines the importance. So I just briefly want to say to end that the idea, it raises an important point, this idea that we should be engaging in participatory work with local communities, working with local knowledge, not only local knowledge, working scientists and the local people working together, developing a more food system-based approach. And that idea is gaining traction. And it underlines the importance of what is being called a multi-actor approach to nutrition, which is at the heart of this conference, I think. And I think this is an opportunity for us to bring an ecological perspective to the table. Thank you.
So we've talked about pollination, farming practices, we've talked about micronutrient fortification, we've talked about the power of women and how some of the communities and slums in Mumbai work, right? So the question that I have for the panel is, we perhaps know what sometimes the right answer is, right? For example, in the case of pollination, sometimes we have success stories. So iodized salt is a big success story in India. I was reading up about it. You know, some people say it was a success in India before it was in the rest of the world, right? So when we have success stories, I would love to hear from all of you. Why are we not able to replicate them? Why hasn't there been another success story in the last 30 years? When we have a solution, why are we not able to sort of more broad base it? So what are sort of the hindrances, power equations? What's roadblocking us in scaling up solutions or in replicating solutions? That question stands for all three of you. Perhaps, Dr. Shankar, we can start with you.
One of the key thing for a successful food fortification program is the industry structure. You know, the way food is produced, procured, processed, and eaten at home. When a lot of staple food is made in a subsistence agricultural system, as earlier, it was difficult. Now that wherever you have industrial concentration, like milk or oil, which are increasing, it lends itself easy for fortification. You need that as a primary thing. Second is a legislative support. You know, salt iodization succeeded because of a law that mandated salt to be iodized. We can't do it for wheat or milk all through because a lot of it is locally produced and eaten, not going through a formal organized sector. But we could still do it to benefit a large number of people. For example, the wheat that is distributed through the public distributed system, with such high levels of anemia, it's a proven intervention. If only government were to take the whole step and say that all the wheat that is going through the public distributed system is fortified, then probably it will become a success and the markets will follow. The government of India took that decision and made salt iodization mandatory. That is what worked.
Richa, why do you think that hasn't happened for something else in 30 years? I know you guys are trying, so what stops us?
So I think it's also got to do with, you know, the particular, let's say, fortification you're talking about, as Dr. Shankar said. It's one got to do with that. Two, it's got to do with the fact that a lot of the impact of iodization was towards the market creation of that branded salt, the iodized salt. And so while, you know, yes, we do kind of supply to NGOs, we work with the NGOs and Akshay Patra and the supply to the midday meal schemes. One of the key drivers of an initiative like this is the market creation of products like this. So that means that there is a consumer market interface which you're trying to create. But I think before that is the whole, you know, aspect of the government and why the government probably went in, and I'm only guessing, in the 60s, because goiter was something which is very visible. When you talk about something like iron deficiency anemia, it is not at all visible. In fact, the symptoms of iron deficiency are often mixed up with general lethargy or not feeling well. So I think those are those aspects also which come in. And I think at the end of the day, the government, it's also how society has evolved, how, you know, the state of government currently, it is a fact that it was driven by the government. The government approached Tata Chemicals. In fact, I say that our business was a business almost by accident, because it's when the government approached Tata Chemicals to make the salt at the plant where we were manufacturing soda ash. That's how Tata Salt actually came about. So yes, there is a significant role which the government played. I think the third area is about measurement. If you look at the iodization program, to this day you can, for every, you know, state, you have data which has been gathered over the years to see how the impact has, you know, changed. And, you know, Dr. Shankar, what you were just sharing. So the data which last year we looked at was 70% or 75% adequately iodized, and now it's moved to 82%. So you have that data which is there for you to see the impact of all that has been done. And I think there's a baseline required for all the micronutrient deficiencies which are critical to be addressed, and iron tops the list. It is the most widespread. So I think it's the measurement of it, it's the government intervention, it's the creation of that market. Now we can create the market once we've kind of got that, and we are still doing that. We've kind of, with the help of a formulation which the National Institute of Nutrition has developed, we've gone ahead and launched it actually in the market. That's where the consumer end of it comes in. So, you know, when we relaunched it actually. So when we launched it 4 years ago, the salt blackened because of the oxidization of the iron. And the consumers don't want to buy that because, you know, that to them is not salt. And that's where the consumer end of it comes in. You can sell that salt through a public distribution system. You can sell it through midday meal schemes, and we do that too. But for you to really scale it up, you've got to have perfect the technology that enables you to deliver salt which the consumer feels is the right salt, and they believe white salt is the right salt. So we are working on that, and so that's, there are many wheels within wheels, so to say.
Absolutely. Let's take that whole issue of the role of different stakeholders to Dr. Barbara, what you spoke about, right? So if we know that this broadly is the right solution, what do you think is the role of various stakeholders, the individual farmer, the community, the government, in scaling something like this up, and where do these things perhaps fall apart?
Okay, so I mean, at a very basic level, in terms of natural fortification of food, it's falling apart at just the knowledge gap level. We still need a lot more information. But then it's about priorities, isn't it? Because the priority in the market tends to be towards yield, and people are programmed to look for high yield rather than looking at the quality of the crop and looking at the micronutrients available. So I think, what would be really useful is if governments or people who have got some kind of control encouraged farmers to think about the quality of their crops. And then there's also the conversation that one needs to have with farmers. So I'm not saying that local knowledge is the answer to everything, but we could do a lot better at integrating local understanding of crops and talking to people about what kinds of crops they want to grow, and then how to produce them in an ecologically useful and sustainable way. And then, that's one of the places where it breaks down. It breaks down on the ground. Lots of time.
Just
Seema, I would really like to...
Okay, we have 2 minutes, so one last comment from both of you, and then, yes.
See, I don't agree that we have to position, when we want to fortify food, that's against improving agriculture and trying to get things through, our food. We must realize that most of the world has virtually eliminated a number of nutritional disorders by adding vitamins and minerals to commonly eaten food. In the 40s, 40% of children in the United States were anemic. The moment they started adding iron to infant food, the anemia today is about 3%. They used to have 5,000 deaths because of B vitamin deficiency, with beriberi, and within 2 years of adding it, it came to zero. I'm not saying it's the only way to go forward. It should be used and exploited. It's grossly underutilized in developing countries. There is a scope for it to benefit a large number of population as we keep finding the right solution. It's a part of the solution. It's not to be projected as the solution.
2 quick thoughts. I think there's a lot lying there in traditional food practices. For example, a lot of experts are now saying in India that one of the reasons we didn't have IDA to the extent we have today is because we used to cook in iron vessels, and that improved the intake of iron. And this is only something which has happened over the years. If you look at the diets of the Banjara, the equivalent of the gypsy population, and what they have is just chilies and onions crushed with cumin and salt. Cumin with its digestive properties, and chilies, which is again. With the capsaicin content, antioxidant properties, they have the healthiest profile. So going back to traditional diets is certainly one. Millets, for example, again, we're going back to the point which was made about farmers. I think working with farmers, again, I think it will differ from crop to crop. So wheat farmers, which are largely large farmers, would the messaging would happen differently from pulses farmers, which over the years, because it's not remunerative, it's small and marginal farmers. So to get them to actually listen and look at the long-term picture, there has to be a benefit for them in the short run. I mean, I have to live till tomorrow to be able to see the benefits of the long run. So I think a segmented approach there is also required.
So, absolutely, the things that we've talked about fortification, farm practices, where do they actually fit in? Big companies, small companies, individual manufacturers, that's been a theme of the conversation over the last day and a half, and we're seeing some examples here. We're also talking about what are the roles of different players, government, private sector, the individual farmer, the woman of the household, the communities, right? So lots of food for thought as you go into breakout space.